Helicopter pilots in Vietnam sat behind steel armor, while door gunners dangled in open air, held only by a monkey strap. Their bodies were exposed, their fate nearly sealed before takeoff. These were not accidents. They were flaws ruthlessly engineered into every Huey, turning mechanics into instant targets with little hope of survival. So why did the deadliest assignment exist at all? And who decided these men had no real chance? The UH-1 Huey's cabin doors stretched nearly 5 feet wide, designed for loading and unloading troops, not for shielding anyone inside. When missions called for maximum field of fire, crews slid the doors all the way back or removed them completely, leaving nothing but open air between the door gunner and the outside world. Pilots, by contrast, sat behind armored seats with steel plates that could stop rifle rounds. For the men at the doors, there was no such protection. The only barrier was a heavy vest, 40 pounds of Kevlar and ceramic, more burden than shield. The M60 machine gun, the door gunner's main weapon, was not fixed to the aircraft. Instead, it hung from a bungee cord bolted to the cabin ceiling. This setup let the gun swing freely, but it forced the gunner to lean out past the edge of the helicopter to aim downward or sweep the landing zone, leaving him exposed. To keep from falling out, gunners clipped a monkey strap, a single webbing tether, to the overhead. It offered just enough restraint to keep a man from tumbling into the jungle, but did nothing to protect him from enemy fire. The cabin floor and lower sidewalls were thin aluminum, never meant to stop bullets. No side armor shielded the gunner's legs or torso. The open door, the bungee-slung gun, and the monkey strap all worked together to put the gunner's body in the most exposed position possible. In effect, the design made the gunner's silhouette a perfect target, framed by the open door, anchored by a strap, and outlined against the sky. The aircraft's protection was drawn like a box around the pilot's seats, leaving the doorways wide open. The system was clear: keep the pilots alive, and accept that the men in the doors would have to take their chances. Mechanics, supply clerks, and radio operators often found themselves pressed into the door gunner's seat, regardless of training or willingness. The Army's official roster rarely matched the reality on the flight line. Helicopter companies burned through non-pilot crew at a rate no training pipeline could keep up with. When a gunner was lost, his replacement was usually drawn from whoever was available in the maintenance platoon. There was no formal door gunner school, just a crash course on the M60, a monkey strap, and a spot on the next mission. Ed Shelton arrived in Vietnam as a helicopter mechanic. Within days, he was told to grab a flak vest and take the left door. He recalled that he had never fired the M60 from a helicopter before. They gave him 5 minutes of instruction, showed him how not to shoot the tail rotor, and that was it. Next thing he knew, they were flying into a hot landing zone. The seat was so hard to fill that some units kept a running list of men who had already been wounded or who refused to fly again. Commanders faced a constant shortage. The job was infamous, one of the worst in the war. Veterans joked that the enemy must have seen the open door and the gunner's body as an invitation. As one put it, it was like having a sign in Vietnamese that said, "Shoot here." Personnel records from Vietnam aviation units show a steady stream of reassignments into the gunner position, often with only the barest introduction to weapons or tactics. The institutional strain ran deep. Every missing gunner meant a mechanic or clerk got pushed into a seat where survival depended less on skill than on luck, and the hope the helicopter would make it out of the landing zone. Huey crews flew into landing zones under a strict rule. The helicopter could not lift off until every man was offloaded or every casualty was brought aboard. No matter how heavy the incoming fire, the ship stayed put. That obligation turned the cabin into a trap. Door gunners, already exposed in the open doorway, became static targets as soon as the skids touched ground. Enemy gunners set up crossfires, aiming for the silhouettes in the doors. The gunner's harness kept him tethered to the aircraft, unable to duck or run. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of diesel, cordite, and sweat. Static. Fumes from leaking hydraulic fluid mixed with exhaust and burning agents in the air, stinging eyes and throat. The floor was slick with mud tracked in from the field and offered little grip. Gunners leaned out, boots slipping, hands clenched on the M60, while rounds snapped through the thin aluminum skin. Slippery, blood from earlier missions dried in the seams, never fully washed away. In the chaos, the risk of falling out was real, especially when the helicopter lurched or banked suddenly. Real danger. Worse yet was the danger if the aircraft went down in a flooded paddy, strapped in and weighed down by armor and ammunition. Door gunners sometimes drowned within reach of the surface, trapped by the very gear meant to keep them alive. Drowned. The doctrine that kept the helicopter on the ground made the gunner's position not just exposed, but inescapable. Survival depended on luck, timing, and the hope that the next liftoff would come before the next burst of fire. The roar of the M60 machine gun filled every inch of the Huey's cabin, a deep, rattling thunder that drowned out almost everything else. Each squeeze of the trigger sent a stream of 7.62mm rounds screaming into the jungle, 600 to 700 rounds per minute, a stuttering barrage that vibrated through the gunner's bones. Orange tracers streaked past the door, bright as basketballs in the midday sun, vanishing into the green below. The barrels glowed cherry red after just a few bursts, so hot that gunners used asbestos gloves to swap them out before they warped or jammed. Inside, the noise was relentless. The rotor's thump-thump hammered at the skull, mingling with the metallic shriek of empty casings bouncing off the floor. Enemy rounds snapped and zinged through the thin walls, ricocheting against metal, sometimes spinning dangerously inside the cabin. The air reeked of cordite, burnt powder, diesel, JP4 fuel, sweat, and blood, a cocktail that clung to clothes and skin. Some gunners carried 2,500 rounds, but in the chaos of a hot landing zone, that could vanish in minutes. During the Tet offensive, crews burned through every belt in less than 45 minutes, landed just long enough to reload, then lifted off again without shutting down. In the Aishao Valley, helicopters lined up for insertions, 15 in, maybe 6 or 7 out. The pace was crushing. Ammunition ran out before fear did. Under that pressure, some gunners started modifying their M60 machine guns, hot-rodding the gas system to fire over 1,000 rounds per minute. It made the gun less reliable, more likely to jam, but in the moment, more lead felt like the only answer. Dennis Weber, a door gunner, said, "You are terrified beyond anything you can describe, so you shoot everything. Kill the bastards. Kill them all." The claim that a door gunner in Vietnam had a life expectancy of 5 minutes is everywhere, repeated in books, magazine articles, and even by some veterans. But the numbers tell a different story. Army records show 2,712 non-pilot crew members killed over more than 10.6 million Huey flight hours. Even if every one of those deaths were door gunners, it would still mean hundreds of hours flown for each fatality, not mere minutes. The myth likely started with a misquote in the press, perhaps Time magazine, and spread because it captured the raw fear of the job. In raw terms, the loss rate was still staggering. Over 5,000 helicopters were destroyed, including 3,000 Hueys. That works out to one helicopter lost every 7.9 sorties during the peak years. The math does not support the legend, but the danger was real enough to feel like a countdown every time the doors opened. Over 90,000 wounded soldiers were pulled from battlefields by helicopter crews, their lives hanging on the speed of evacuation. In Vietnam, the time from injury to surgery often dropped below an hour, transforming survival odds. Fewer than 1% of those who made it to a hospital died in care, a record unmatched in previous wars. Yet the same helicopters that saved so many demanded a steep price from their own crews. Aircrew made up 10% of all U.S. casualties in Vietnam, and door gunners faced more days in combat in a single year than World War II infantry did in 4. John Hulbert, who survived his tour, later said, "PTSD was working on me as soon as I got back. I still attend meetings. The system rescued thousands, but the men at the doors carried the scars long after the war ended." Today, helicopters remain vital to modern warfare, but survivability still battles against tactical necessity. Lessons from Vietnam's unprotected door gunners echo in every design choice and mission plan. The cost of ignoring human vulnerability is not just history. It is a risk that lives on in every conflict. Share your thoughts below.